Undergarment Theater in the Grand Central Market for having us, and of course all of you guys for coming. And I want to get right to it. We have a very special guest, Nancy Olson! Oh my gosh, you're beautiful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I have to tell a quick story about how this happened. It is quite amazing. 2 Fridays ago, I had announced that Sunset Boulevard would be screening in this theater, and I posted it on the internet. 2 hours later, I'm having dinner at Kate Mantellini, and the waiter comes over to me and says, "You'll never believe who's in the restaurant." And I said, "My gosh, who could it be?" Nancy Olson from Sunset Boulevard is here. And he hadn't even seen the posting, so it was just so serendipitous, and I had to go over and say hello. And I didn't want to interrupt you at dinner, but Nancy agreed to do this, and then I learned that your husband was Alan Livingston, who ran Capitol Records, who signed my father, and the Beatles, and the Beach Boys, in a band. So a lot of Hollywood history here, and I'm so happy and honored that you're here. And I guess I'm going to ask you, the very first question is, how many people have seen Sunset Boulevard?
Yes.
But I have a question. How many of you have seen it only on a small screen? You have to understand that film can be great works of art. And it is amazing for someone, a doctor's daughter from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to actually find herself making history in one of those films. And Sunset Boulevard has a design, it has a core, it has a truth. All great works of art have truth. A great painting, a great book, they resonate that truth. And there's every component is important, and it's meant to be on a big screen because it's a big story. There are big performances. It's a big theme. So that reducing it to a small screen, you lose so much. So I'm thrilled that you are going to see it tonight. As it was designed to be. So I'm just delighted, really.
How many people are seeing it for the first time?
Not that many.
Nancy, how would you describe this movie to someone who hasn't seen it?
Well, we'll get to that.
Well, then let's just ask, how did you get involved and how were you cast?
Well, I think we should start there.
Okay.
Because I grew up in Wisconsin and went to the University of Wisconsin, but I was always interested in the performing arts. And when I transferred in my sophomore year to UCLA, and I became a theater arts major. And they happened to have, they had then, and they still have, one of the great theater arts departments in all of the universities. And so I said to my parents, I don't want to come back to Wisconsin. But there was another reason I didn't want to go back to Wisconsin, the winters, you know what I mean? Anyway, so I was a student, and I was in every production I could try out for, from Shakespeare to Moliere to Franz Molnar. He wrote a play called The Play's the Thing, and I played the lead. And a talent scout from Paramount came to see me, or came to see the play. And he tapped on the door of the dressing room after the play, and he said, I'd like you to come and make a screen test for us. I was absolutely floored, but we arranged to do that. And they signed me to a 7-year contract, and I kept going to school. But I would visit the set, or the Paramount Pictures, the entire area, and I was fascinated with it. I mean, you can imagine, I was this young girl, and I'd walk down the main avenue, and there was Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Alan Ladd and Barbara Stanwyck, and it was an amazing experience. And I knew something about film. I certainly was an actress, so I made it my business to know. And I would sit in the commissary and watch Cecil B. DeMille come in, and Hal Wallace, and Billy Wilder, and William Wyler. And it was extraordinary, because these were the great filmmakers of that time.
Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so Billy Wilder was very prominent and one of the main directors and producers and writers. And he would stop me as I was walking to the commissary, and he would engage me in conversation. And he'd ask me, what am I taking at the school? What are my professors? What are the plays that I'm doing? And how did I feel about it all? And it seemed kind of odd. So one day, I got a call, and they said, we are putting you in a picture called Sunset Boulevard. And I said, really? And they said, yes, Billy Wilder is directing. I said, oh my, that's fantastic. They said, we've cast Bill Holden. I know who that was. We have cast Eric von Stroheim, and actually, I knew who that was, because at UCLA, we studied the great filmmakers, and he was one of the great early directors and filmmakers, so I know who that was. And it's starring Gloria Swanson. I didn't know who that was. I had absolutely no idea who that was. So I asked my mother, and she explained to me that Gloria Swanson was one of the great silent and black and white filmmakers of the 20s and the 30s. And she had rather disappeared. So then I read the script. Wow. This was a story that had a tragedy along with a poignancy and a challenge to every single performer that was part of it. Now, I've been asked about Bill Holden a lot. We actually ended up doing 4 pictures together. And the brilliance of the casting of Bill Holden is what probably kept the glue of that film together. Now, you have to know something. Bill had been a very promising star. He did Golden Boy, and he did Our Town, really extraordinary performances and beautiful films. And then he went into the Army, and he got kind of forgotten. So when he came back to Paramount, he was kind of lost. They had him in secondary roles. And he was in a marriage that wasn't really working out. And he was drinking too much. So he was losing his career. He was in a marriage that didn't work. And he was beginning to become an alcoholic. So Joe Gillis is a man who is at the end of his rope. He cannot figure out any longer how to survive. He is desperate. And that intrinsic desperation was who Bill Holden was at that moment. And of course, Sunset Boulevard changed his life because his relationship with Billy Wilder completely it opened up a new world for him and new parts, and he became really a glorious, successful movie star. Watch it when you see it. Joe Gillis, he is a man who ultimately he sells his soul in order to survive. So that is that tragedy. By the way, everybody in this movie is an opportunist, including me. And by the way, one of the reasons that I think that Billy cast me was, the part was Betty Schaefer. She was an aspiring writer. I was a student. He wanted to know how I spoke. Did I articulate myself, even though he wrote it? But would I be comfortable expressing myself as it was written? And I'm sure that, and also he needed a strong girl, a determined character. And I had that kind of, So, really, he didn't want me to act. He wanted me to be just myself. He gave me practically no direction whatsoever. I wish he had, actually. It would have helped.
Who wouldn't?
But he wanted me, just me. To the point where Edith Head was the great, I'm going on and on. Is that okay? You're a great host. Well, the thing is that Edith Head did the clothes, did the wardrobe. Yeah. And she came in with various things, and I would wear them, and I'd walk on the set, and Billy would say, no. I liked what she had on yesterday when she visited us. I ended up wearing all my own clothes. I did not have a great wardrobe, by the way. You're not going to see anything fantastic up there. But it was Betty Schaefer. That was what he wanted. And by the way, just to tell you, I want to tell you something. In the scene where Bill and I are sitting on the edge of the bathtub, the party scene, that was my favorite best dress. It was a dark, it's black and white, so you don't know what color it is, but it was a dark green. And my father had given me a cameo, a beautiful cameo that was surrounded by engraved gold, and I had it right there. And that cameo is now, my daughter Jenny has it somewhere in her jewelry drawer, and she brings it out and wears it every once in a while. So, anyway, my character is ambitious. She wants to be a writer. She is also an opportunist. But of course, her tragedy is that she falls in love with a man who's already sold his soul. So, this is a tragedy on every single level. Now, let me tell you something. The word got out. Something's interesting happening on this set over at, so-and-so. And it's at about 6 o'clock every night in a small theater. There were maybe 15 or 16 films being shot. There was an Alan Ladd film, of Bob Hope, of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, etc. And the people, the director, the technical people, would go in and see their work that they had shot the day before. Then they began showing the dailies of Sunset Boulevard. And guess what? Nobody would leave until they had seen those dailies. Wow. They didn't leave when their dailies were through. They were fascinated. They wanted to see what happens now. Wow. So that they brought in more seats. That has never happened in the history of studio, I don't think. Anyway, We talked earlier about the truth. And what really the truth is that movie stars were commodities. They were made larger than life to sell. And there was a distortion that went with that. You cannot live larger and be larger than life. And the gene was vulnerable. And by the way, some of the greatest stars were the most vulnerable of all because they were the most easily to distort. And they were gifted in helping that along. So the truth is that movie stars, especially of that time, were owned by the studios. They were commodities. They were hyped in order to sell tickets. And if indeed you actually believed your own publicity, this was dangerous. And when you got to a certain age, you were not as saleable. So you were thrown away. So there's a famous story about Louis B. Mayer, who, as you remember, was the head of MGM. And he went to a small screening of Sunset Boulevard. And he went over to Billy after it was over and he said, "How dare you? How can you do this to us?" And Billy said, "Go yourself." And he walked out, Billy just walked out. Allison, I'm writing my memoirs. Yes. I've had a really interesting life, I have to tell you. And I'm really old, too. But I was married to Alan J. Lerner and Lowe, and My Fair Lady was actually dedicated to me. Can you believe it? And then I married the love of my life, Alan Livingston, who was probably a giant in the music business. He was a giant in the music business. And he also, by the way, left Capitol in the mid-50s, went over to NBC television, created Bonanza, and then went back to Capitol and signed the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the band. And also started a small company and he signed Don McLean and put out a little thing called American Pie. Remember that? He was a beautiful man. And we have a beautiful son. I have beautiful daughters from my first marriage. And it has been a really interesting journey. I'm going to read to you something, if you don't mind. It's a kind of a repeat of what I said, but with something added. This film tells the brutal truth about a part of the motion picture business and how it can ruin one's life. To be exploited for other people's profit can be both painful and humiliating. Even though one is paid, sometimes a great deal, and receives the emotional, ego-fulfilling rewards, to be portrayed as larger than life is distorting and destroys the delicate balance between reality and fantasy. Creating stars sold products. They were constantly hyping the qualities that create an irresistible commodity. This was particularly possible when someone had not only the tangible and obvious assets, beauty, personality, etc., but sometimes the most important quality of all was vulnerability. A perfect example was, of course, Marilyn Monroe. We have to acknowledge that people who are willing and cooperate about making themselves accessible to exploitation are also accessories to the crime, as well as victims. There are no easy answers, except in perhaps those rare, especially talented artists. She's really a character actress, Meryl Streep, who offers her extraordinary range of talents that they do not need to hide. Empowering vulnerable people in the movie industry is as unacceptable and contemptuous as the, excuse me, current Republican Party. It empowers the ignorant and angry citizens. Norma Desmond, who only wanted to be the greatest star of them all, and allowed herself to be exploited in an industry that casually threw her away when they were through with her. I have often wondered if I was not deeply affected by the truth of this story. I knew even then I did not want to be a quote-unquote movie star who would someday be thrown away. That's it.